Good.
What I'm going to talk to you more about would be more cognitive symptoms and more psychological or emotional symptoms. Okay?
I think I just take me practice projecting to my head that was slow head, and I just take a little while for just soak into my head to use that word.
Mm-hmm. Right, and sometimes so that's one thing that I'm going to talk about right now. So with cognitive symptoms, I'm talking about different domains of your functioning, right? So I'm talking about your attention, I'm talking about your memory, executive functioning, processing speed, so how fast you can do things, language, right? Your ability to express yourself and understand what other people are saying, and problem solving. So all of these, we tend to group these functionings into these categories, even though they're much more complex, right? So one category that I'll focus on is memory, right? So like what you're saying is sometimes it's hard to take something in and keep it, right?
Soak it in.
Right. So with memory is this really complicated kind of network of systems, right? It's not whether you can memorize something or not. It's really kind of a set of different stages, right? So the first stage of memory is taking something in. We call that the encoding phase, right? So in order to successfully take in information, there's a lot of things that you have to do. You have to be able to be aware of it. You have to be able to perceive it, right? So if you have issues with vision or hearing, that might influence your ability to take in information. If you're not really focused on it or you're not really paying attention, you might not get the full extent of that information, right? Or it may not be accurate.
So that's, to say that is, if you're tired, unrested, sufficiently rested, you're not going to be able to learn very well.
Right.
So that's a learning disability if you're not rested.
So it's not necessarily a learning disability, but it definitely impacts your ability to function at your highest potential. So the example I'll give, so sleepy is a really good example, but let's say you have a cold, right? Try to think about all the symptoms that come into play when you have a cold. You feel foggy, you're tired, right? You're not really able to kind of perform your duties that you normally would if you're sick, right? If you have a cold, right? Same thing. So those physical symptoms or even being tired will affect your ability to memorize things or pay attention to things, right? So there's strategies that we can use that can help kind of make those processes stronger. And I'll get to those a little bit later, okay? But so far, that's the first stage of memory, right? Taking something in. The next stage is storage. So once it's in, we want to make sure that it stays in, right? We want to keep it in our minds. We want to be able to access it later, right? So it's storage, okay? And then once it's in, what good is that information if it's in there if you can't get it back out?
Right.
Right, so once it's soaked in, that's the storage part. But then the next stage is retrieval, right? Getting it out. And not just getting it out when you need it, right?
Right, and that was the thing that, Mike, you were talking about earlier.
Right. So one common thing, or one example is, have you ever been in a position where you're trying to find the word, right? It's at the tip of your tongue and you can't say that
Who's
word.
had that? Who's had that? Yeah.
Right. That happens to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's really important not just to be able to get that information out, but to get it when you need it, right? And so the retrieval part, I would say, is probably one of the hardest or the most common issues when it comes to memory. So the information, it gets in, it's hard to find it, to get it out.
Well, if you're about to have one and your memory can't work, so you can't think of how far get it out of you.
Okay, yeah, so it's like, once it's in, it's finding the right strategy to get it out, right? The last stage of memory is maintenance, right? So it's not just getting the information in, storing it, and getting it out, but now we're talking about being able to access that information over a long period of time, right? Taking short-term memory and putting it into long-term memory. So this would be things like riding a bike, right? That's maintained over a long period of time, right? Names of family members, right? That's long-term memory. So that's the last stage, is being able to access information later on, you know, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, right? Think about studying on a test. You can study, you can practice, you have flashcards, you know it in the moment that you're studying, but then on the test, if you forget it all, then that's a big problem too, right? So that's the last stage. Okay.